The morning Harriet told her niece to get out of the house, she said it like she was asking someone to take out the trash. "You need to leave," Harriet said, not looking up from her phone. "Today, I need the room." Tessa stood in the kitchen doorway holding a mug of coffee she hadn't yet touched. She was 24 years old. She had lived in this house for 6 years. Since the car accident that took her parents on a wet November highway outside Columbus. Since Harriet, her mother's sister, had shown up at the hospital, signed the paperwork, and driven her home without saying much of anything. She had been grateful then. For a long time she had been grateful. "The room," Tessa said slowly. "My son is coming back from Denver. He needs somewhere to stay." Harriet finally looked up. "You're old enough. You'll figure it out." That was it. No warning, no notice, no apology. Just "you'll figure it out." The way you'd say it to a plant you were setting outside before a frost. What Harriet did not say, what she never said, was that Tessa had been paying reduced rent for the past 2 years. That Tessa had taken on the grocery shopping, the cleaning, the yard work, the twice-weekly rides to Harriet's rheumatologist across town. That Tessa had quietly, steadily, made herself useful in every way she knew how, because she had spent 6 years believing that being useful was the price of being allowed to stay. What Harriet also didn't say was that 3 weeks earlier, a letter had arrived for Tessa from a property management company in Pittsburgh. Tessa's grandmother, her father's mother, a woman named Ruth, who had died quietly the previous spring, had left Tessa a small house in a neighborhood called Lawrenceville. The letter had explained the transfer of deed, the current tenant situation, the next steps. Harriet had opened it. Harriet had read it. Harriet had put it in the drawer beneath the phone charger and said nothing. Tessa didn't know any of this yet. All she knew, standing in that kitchen with cold coffee in her hands, was that she had until Friday. She packed 2 bags. Not because she only had 2 bags worth of belongings, but because loading more than that into her car felt like admitting something she wasn't ready to admit. She folded her clothes carefully, tucked her laptop into the side pocket, put her mother's photograph, the one from a camping trip in 1997, her mother laughing with her mouth wide open, between 2 sweaters so it wouldn't crack. She was in the driveway, loading the second bag into the trunk when the man next door said her name. She'd seen him before. He'd been staying on the porch of the vacant house at the end of the block for about a week. A lean man somewhere in his late 30s, with careful eyes and clothes that had been worn past their intended purpose. The neighbors had complained. Someone had called the city. Nothing had come of it yet. His name, she would learn later, was Joel. "You moving out?" he asked. He wasn't being intrusive. He sounded like he genuinely wanted to know. "Apparently," Tessa said. "You got somewhere to go?" She thought about it honestly. Her friend Cara had a studio in Clintonville. Her coworker Dana had offered her couch once, 2 years ago, as a joke. She had $412 in her checking account and a part-time job at a copy center that paid $11 an hour. "Not really," she said. He nodded like that made sense. "I know a shelter on 5th that's clean. They have a women's section. It's not permanent, but it's safe." She looked at him. He didn't look away. There was no pity in his face, just information offered plainly, the way you'd give someone directions. "How do you know that?" she asked. "I stayed there last winter," he said, "before I found work. Lost the work again in March." He said it without shame, which she found more disarming than she expected. "I'm Joel Tessa." They shook hands in the driveway, which felt both absurd and completely natural. She didn't go to the shelter that night. She slept in her car in the parking lot of a Kroger on Morse Road, with the seat reclined and her mother's photograph on the passenger seat. It was not the worst night of her life, but it was in the conversation. She ran into Joel again 3 days later at the public library on Parsons Avenue. She was there to use the internet. Her phone data had run out and she was trying to find a second job. And he was there reading, which surprised her more than it should have. He had a book open on the table, a thick one, and he was moving his fingers slowly beneath the lines. He looked up when she sat down across the table from him. "The Kroger lot," he said. She stared at him. "Were you? I wasn't following you. I sleep behind the dry cleaner on 5th. I saw your car 2 mornings in a row." He paused. "I wasn't going to say anything. But you did. You looked cold." The honesty of that stopped her. She had been cold. The nights had dropped into the 40s, and her jacket was the wrong weight for it. "What are you reading?" she asked. He turned the cover toward her. East of Eden. Steinbeck. Is it good? I think so. I'm not fast. He said it matter-of-factly. I only learned to read well about 4 years ago. I didn't really have school the way most people did. Tessa didn't ask him to explain. He didn't seem to want her to. They sat in the quiet of the library for a while, both of them with their separate things to do. And somehow that was enough. That evening she bought him a cup of coffee from the gas station on the corner. The kind in the styrofoam cup that costs $1. And they sat on a bench outside the library and talked until the streetlights came on. She learned that Joel had grown up in a series of foster placements in West Virginia, that he'd done construction work for years, had been good at it, until a back injury had taken him out for 8 months, and his landlord hadn't waited. That he was not unintelligent, not even close, but that certain basic things that other people assumed everyone knew, he had simply never been taught. He learned that she had lost her parents at 18. That she had spent 6 years earning her place in a house where she'd always been a guest. That she was trying to figure out, at 24, what it looked like to build a life when you didn't know where you were allowed to stand. They were, she thought, not so different in the most essential way. Both of them had been told, by circumstance, and by people who should have known better, that they were the kind of person things happened to, not the kind things happened for. Neither of them had entirely believed it, but neither of them had entirely escaped it either. Kara let Tessa sleep on the couch for 2 weeks. It was tight and uncomfortable, and Kara was generous about it, which made it easier. During those 2 weeks, Tessa worked double shifts at the copy center and applied for every job posting she could find that matched her associate's degree in business administration. She found Joel most mornings at the library. She started bringing him $1 coffee, and he started saving her the table by the window. She taught him how to use the library's online job portal, and he taught her how to negotiate for a higher starting wage, which he'd learned from a foreman in Morgantown, who had told him it was the most important professional skill a person could have, and that nobody ever taught it. She helped him fill out applications. He helped her revise her resume. She found him a work boot donation program at a church on Oak Street. He found her a free community meal on Wednesdays that was actually good. Soup and real bread, not the kind of dinner that made you feel like a charity case. She asked him once, after about a week of this, why he was so calm. He'd been without stable housing for months. He was reading Steinbeck in a public library because he had nowhere else to go. And he was just calm, focused, not defeated. I've been lower than this, he said simply, and I got back up, so I know I can. She thought about that for a long time. In the 3rd week, something shifted. A temp agency called Joel about a warehouse position in Groveport. Loading and unloading, physical work, the kind he knew. It paid $15 an hour, and the agency said if he lasted 90 days, they'd try to convert him to permanent. He needed a phone number to give them for callbacks. He used Tessa's. She fielded 2 calls that week, taking messages carefully, texting him the details in real time. He got the position. He started on a Monday. The following Thursday, Tessa got a call from a property management office in Pittsburgh. It was a follow-up, the woman on the phone said. They had sent a letter in early October regarding the estate of Ruth Calloway. They wanted to confirm Tessa had received it. Tessa sat very still. I didn't, she said. I didn't receive any letter. There was a pause on the line. The woman explained again, carefully. Tessa's grandmother, her father's mother, had passed in April. She had left Tessa a property in the Lawrenceville neighborhood of Pittsburgh, a small house, 2 bedrooms, currently with a month-to-month tenant. The deed had already been transferred. They just needed Tessa to confirm receipt and sign some paperwork. Tessa asked the woman to repeat the address. She wrote it down on the back of a Kroger receipt. She sat with it for a long moment, the receipt in her hand, the phone still warm from the call. And then she thought about the drawer beneath the phone charger in Harriet's kitchen. She thought about how she had lived in that house for 6 years, and never once looked through that drawer. She thought about how Harriet had watched her pack 2 bags and load them into a car, and said, "You'll figure it out." She did not let herself be consumed by it, but she felt it, fully, the way you feel something when you finally let yourself look at it directly. The weight of it, the specific grief of having been betrayed by someone you had trusted, simply because they were family. She called the property management office, back the next morning and made an appointment. She drove to Pittsburgh on a Saturday alone, with her mother's photograph on the passenger seat and a coffee in the cup holder. The house was on a quiet street lined with sycamores that had already gone gold. It was small, 2 bedrooms, a narrow porch, a yard in the back that needed work. The tenant, a quiet man named Carl who worked nights at a hospital, had been there 2 years and paid on time every month without fail. She walked through the rooms slowly. The floors were hardwood, worn but solid. The kitchen had good light. The bathroom was old but clean. She stood in the smaller bedroom, which was empty, and thought about her grandmother Ruth, a woman she had only met twice. Once at a family reunion when she was 9, once at her father's funeral. Ruth had been a small, deliberate woman who pressed Tessa's hands between both of hers when she said goodbye and told her, "You have good in you, I can tell." Tessa had not thought of that in years. She thought of it now in the empty room and had to take a breath. She called the property manager from the porch and said she'd like to keep the current tenant if he was willing to stay. She asked about the rental income. It was modest, enough combined with a full-time job to make things workable. She signed the paperwork electronically in the car. On the drive back to Columbus, she cried for about 40 minutes and then stopped, because she had cried enough over things that could not be changed, and she was tired of it. She was done being tired of it. Joel's 90 days came and went. The warehouse converted him to full-time. He found a room in a boarding house on Livingston Avenue. Clean, affordable, nothing remarkable except that it was his. With a door that locked and a window that faced east, so the morning light came in when he opened the blinds. He told Tessa about it at the library, on a Tuesday afternoon in January. He was reading Grapes of Wrath now, because after East of Eden he'd decided he wanted to read all of Steinbeck in order, which she thought was one of the most quietly ambitious things she had ever heard anyone say. "I want to show you something," he said. He opened his bag, a proper backpack now, not the canvas duffel he'd been carrying in October, and took out a folder. Inside was a letter. It was from a GED program at Columbus State. He'd enrolled. Classes started in February. She looked at the letter and then at him. "I've been wanting to do this for 10 years, he said. "I just kept waiting until things were stable, and then I figured things might not ever be perfect, but they're stable enough." She didn't say anything for a moment. She was thinking about the morning in October when she'd been loading 2 bags into a car in a driveway, with $400 and nowhere to go, and this man had offered her the address of a shelter like it was a gift, because for him it had been. "Stable enough," she said. "Yeah." In February, Tessa got a job offer, a real one, full-time, at a small nonprofit in Clintonville that handled housing assistance for people coming out of transitional situations. The position was program coordinator. The salary was not remarkable, but it was enough, and the work was the kind she understood from the inside in a way she hadn't earned from a classroom. She accepted on the spot. She thought, walking out of that interview into the cold February air, that there was a version of her life in which Harriet had said nothing, in which the drawer beneath the phone charger had stayed closed, in which she had kept coming home to that house, kept being useful, kept being a guest who paid in labor for the right to stay. She didn't know if she would have been okay in that version. She thought maybe she would have been. She had always found ways to manage. But she wouldn't have been this. Standing on a sidewalk in Clintonville with a job offer in her pocket, and a house in Pittsburgh generating quiet income, and a friend who was reading all of Steinbeck in order at the Columbus Public Library and learning to be proud of it. She wouldn't have been this particular version of herself, who had been thrown out in October and had built something from it that was genuinely, specifically hers. She went back to Harriet Street one afternoon in March, not to the house. She had no reason to go to the house, but to the neighborhood, to drop off a donation at the church on Oak Street that ran the Wednesday meals. She was parking the car when she saw Harriet on the sidewalk. Harriet looked smaller than she remembered, or maybe she just looked like what she was, which was a woman in her late 50s who had made a series of choices and was living in the consequences of them. Tessa had heard, through Kara, that Harriet's son had stayed for 3 weeks and then left again, this time for Portland, and that Harriet was alone in the house and had been struggling with her knee. They saw each other at the same moment. Harriet started to say something. Her mouth opened. Tessa looked at her. Not with hatred, because she was past that, had worked through it in the car on the way back from Pittsburgh and in the shower and in the quiet of the library on Parsons Avenue, but with a clarity that she was aware Harriet could feel. "I know about the letter," Tessa said. Her voice was even. "The one from the property management company, in October." Harriet's mouth stayed open but no sound came out. "I'm not going to do anything about it," Tessa said. "I just needed you to know that I know." She walked past her. She dropped off the donation. She drove home. She did not feel triumphant. She did not feel satisfied in the way she might have imagined. She felt clean, which was different. Lighter, like she'd set something down that she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. That spring, Joel passed his GED. He called Tessa from outside the testing center, and she could hear in his voice that he was trying very hard not to sound overwhelmed and failing at it. "You did it," she said. "I did," he said. And then, after a pause, "I almost didn't take the test. This morning I almost just went to work instead." "What stopped you?" He thought about it. "I kept thinking, I've survived worse than a test. I've been colder than a testing room. I've been more scared than this and come out the other side." Another pause. "And I thought about the library, about the window table." She smiled. "What about it?" "I thought, I want to be able to tell that version of me, the one sitting there in October, that it was worth showing up." She held the phone for a moment without speaking. "It was," she said finally. "It really was." By summer, she had transferred enough equity from the Pittsburgh rental to put down a deposit on a small place in Columbus. A one-bedroom above a flower shop on 5th, with good light and a leaky faucet she fixed herself, after watching 3 YouTube tutorials. She hung her mother's photograph above the bookshelf. She built from pine boards and brackets she bought at the hardware store. She stood back and looked at it. The apartment, the photograph, the bookshelf, with its small but growing collection of books, and felt something she didn't have a perfect word for. Not happiness exactly. Something more durable than happiness. The sense of having built something that was genuinely, structurally hers, that no one had given her and no one could take away. She thought about what Harriet had said in October, dismissing her with 4 words. "You'll figure it out." She had. She had figured it out. She thought Harriet had meant it as an afterthought, a way of not having to think about it anymore. But it had turned out to be the most useful thing anyone had ever said to her, because it had forced her to discover that she was, in fact, the kind of person who could figure things out, who had always been that person, even when she'd been living in someone else's house and calling it home. She put the kettle on. She opened the window above the sink. The evening air came in, warm and soft, carrying the smell of flowers from the shop below. She had been set free by someone who thought they were getting rid of her. And she had built something worth keeping.